Hey folks, Matt Easton here, scholagladiatoria. So this is the next in my series of movie and TV fight reviews. And if you're not familiar with those, have a look at my playlist on my channel. If you enjoy this, you'll probably enjoy some more of my videos that I've done in the past. Now, we're into season 4, the final season of Black Sails. And I don't know how many of my viewers know, but I'm a big fan of Black Sails. I've enjoyed it a lot. And this is from the very first episode of the first season, and it's the culminating, should we say, Cutlass fight. Now, as many of my viewers know, I am a massive fan of cutlasses. I teach military sabre and cutlass, and so therefore I have some views on this fight, but I'll say straight up at the beginning, I think it's fantastic, okay? It's one of the best fights from my perspective that I've seen on a TV show in a long time. Okay, so let's go straight into the fight and I'll break it down and make a few observations as we go along. Right, so let's just stop it just there. So Flint starts in a guard like this that we would know as terse or outside guard. Completely sensible, no problem at all with that. The way that they gather distance or come towards each other to fight is with gathering steps, which is not what we would see in 19th century cutlass necessarily. We would see more of what we would call a lunge step. That is, the back foot stays where it is and the front foot moves forward to hit. Here they just move straight into cutting distance and stay at that distance, and hence they're able to do kicks and punches and hits with the hilt and this kind of thing. That's absolutely fine, I don't have a problem with that. They obviously wanted to show lots of a more diverse set of techniques in this fight, involving punching with the hilt, punching with the fist, grabbing, kneeing, kicking, this kind of stuff. And it makes it look more like a real fight. I think it's cool. In terms of the guards and the cuts that they're doing, they're all fine. I have no problem with them at all. Let's carry on with the fight. So one thing we do see here, which is a little bit movie fight-ish, I'll turn around so I don't hit my own television here, is when he gives a cut, he does a big movement around with the arm like this. Now, this is similar to something we actually do, which is called a moulinet, okay? But a moulinet usually comes from the wrist, okay? So it's much, much quicker like this. In movie fighting, they what we call telegraph, that is, send a message to the other person of what they're about to do, and so they do a big hand motion like this. In reality, if a person moved their arm in that big of an arc before doing a cut, you would just go stab, or you would just go cut straight into their arm, or stab straight into the arm, okay? There are all sorts of things you could do, or if you just defended, it would be very easy to defend. So it's a very kind of slow and cumbersome way of giving a cut, but credit to these guys, they do it quite quickly and quite competently. So I don't think it breaks the rhythm. It doesn't bother me at all, actually. And I have to say, there are some people who do actually fight like this. Not saying that they should, but they do. Let's carry on with the fight. So there were a few interesting things in there. They did both point down guards and point up guards. That's absolutely good. So essentially the guards or parries with cutlass or sabre divide into essentially point down guards and point up guards. I liked it. There was use of the hilt, there was use of the offhand and kicking and all of this kind of stuff. And there was also a nice detail there where the edge was laid onto Flint, I believe it was, and once the edge was laid on, he then slashed with the blade, which is really, really nice, a really nice detail. And if you're very, very close to someone, rather than trying to chop like this, like most people would maybe instinctively do, if you can lay the blade on and then slice, essentially a draw cut, that's actually a very effective thing to do in close range. Let's carry on with the fight. So a very nice set of movements there. Actually, I don't have any problem with them. They're absolutely classic sabre moves and they fit perfectly with a hanger or a cutlass. Really, really good stuff. They finish in quite a classic Hollywood scenario of where their blades are crossed and they're both kind of counter grappling. Now, Unlike Star Wars, for example, where I've criticised the fact that people come together with their weapons crossed and then have a whole conversation like this, when actually at that range there's lots of things you can do, here they actually do those things. Flint's opponent actually rams him up against whatever he's up against and does actually kind of, you know, profit from the fact that he's managed to get his weapon up and bound, as we would call it, or crossed. Once you've occupied a person's weapon with your own weapon, it frees up the rest of your body to do things to them while not having to worry necessarily, or not worry so much, about the fact that their weapon could hit you in some way, because you've occupied it with your own weapon. So really, really good stuff. I don't know who the choreographer is for this fight, but thumbs up, really, really great work. Let's carry on with the fight. So there, what we saw, Flint actually took advantage of this rather than his opponent. So they're crossed here, and Flint essentially knees the guy, we presume in the crotch, we don't see. In actual fact, when they pan out and we see the position they're in, there are other more effective things probably that he could have done, or that he could have done immediately after kneeing the person. A classic one, if the blades are crossed, is to pivot around that point and apply your edge to their neck or head on that side. Or conversely, to do the exact reverse and hit them with the pommel. You can of course couple those things up with a kick or a knee to the lower parts. So if he had done, if this was how a real fight panned out, and you kicked a person in the groin or the knee or whatever you hit them down low, what you then immediately do, bam, as they're weakened in the lower part, is then pivot around that point to bring either your edge or indeed your point to bear, and you could finish the fight at that point. Let's carry on with the next bit. So we saw that from that grapple position, in actual fact, Flint did very much use the hilt to punch with. Perfectly good. This, in a way, you have to be aware of this. This is not a criticism of the fight, because I think it's a great fight. But in reality, whilst you might apply the hilt punch, you wouldn't just punch a person and then kind of let them go, as it were. Having punched them in the face, you'd probably then usually follow up with the blade, because that's the bit that's going to kill them. So punch them in the face, and then immediately, if you brought the back end of the weapon forward, you've charged the tip of the weapon up for a really nice powerful cut. Or indeed, if you knock them too far away, you can bring the point online and immediately pursue them with a thrust. The last bit we saw in this segment was where the opponent's hanger blade had come up against what it looks like the bottom of maybe where a cannon is mounted, something solid anyway, and Flint kicks into the side of the blade and snaps it. Would this happen? Could this happen? Well, that's a tricky one. It could happen. It theoretically could happen. If someone's steel blade was bound against something solid and you kicked it very hard there, just behind the area where it couldn't move, it's possible that it would break. If I tried to do that with this cutlass, I don't think I could do it very easily. However, not all blades were made equal, and if, for example, his blade had taken a lot of damage from the fight already, if it had a particularly deep notch in it or something like this, that can act as a focus point, a stress point essentially, that where if you kick anywhere near it, it might snap at that point. So I have no problem with it. It's really imaginative, it helps the story along, it is physically possible, even though it's physically unlikely. Let's carry on with the fight. Okay, in that segment there are a couple of things to say. Flint took a wild swing with his arm, and what was nice was his opponent actually did what I mentioned earlier in this review, and that is if someone makes a very wide motion with their arm and actually leads with their arm and hand and hilt rather than leading with the blade out forwards. Okay, if I do this quickly, the opponent doesn't have any chance of being able to grab my hand. But if I go like this as I move towards them, bam, they can come in and grab here. And that's exactly what he does, and it's really, really nice. I love that they do that, because in a fight, if you've got a cutlass, you do have a spare hand. If the opponent is giving you an opportunity whereby either with a parry you can grab them, or if they just do their arms so wide that you can just go grab and hit at the same time or punch at the same time, then you do that. That's absolutely great. They're thinking like actual fighters, and I love that because we see that so rarely in fight choreography. And I also have to say at this point that I love the way that it's filmed as well. Very often when you see fights in movies and TV now, you don't see very much of the fight, but here you can actually see techniques. You can see that they're moving in and out of distance. You can see the guards that they're making, the cuts and the thrusts. You can actually see the fight and understand the fight. And very often in films now, they're edited and cut in such a way that you just can't really understand what's going on. You just understand the beginning and the end, and you don't really get what happened in the middle. But this is really great, better narrative. In terms of how they've ended up, Flint's on the floor. His opponent, who his blade has been broken, is now essentially trying to use that as a dagger to finish him off. I only have one criticism or observation of this position. When Flint went down on the ground, he still had his sword in his hand. His opponent, whilst he is coming down with his broken blade to finish Flint off, Flint's hand is still holding his weapon over here. So in reality, he could occupy that blade with this hand and hit the guy or stab the guy with the weapon in his other hand. But for narrative reasons, they don't want it to finish that easily, or rather they want to bring in another device for the fight to make it a bit more brutal or visceral or more like fights that most people can relate to. So we're going to have a look at that next bit now. Let's have a look. So I think that's the best bit to finish on, and that's the end of the fight essentially. And I really like the fact that he finished up on the floor, pummeling the guy with his fists, having hit him in the head with a cannonball. It really gives the sense of a real brawl, of a real fight. And I'll talk about, there's a fight in Game of Thrones which I think is better than all of the others. To me, the fights in Game of Thrones generally are not very good quality, but there's one fight which I think is good, and it's because it shares a similar feeling with this, and that is it feels like a fight. And for me, despite the fact that I teach people how to use swords, and I collect swords, and swords are my main focus, I actually don't mind that they went to the use of a broken sword, a cannonball and fists, because to me it looks more like a fight, and that's what I would like. That's what I like and what I expect to see from this kind of program's fight choreography. Something that feels like a real fight, and this does. And absolutely, with short-bladed weapons, and cutlasses are relatively short, you know, they're only a bit bigger than a machete, I do believe that very often it would end up in a very close fight with grappling, on the floor, all of this kind of stuff, unless one person was noticeably better than the other, in which case they'd probably finish them off quite quickly with their edge or point. So just to wrap it up, I think this is one of the best fights I've seen in years in any TV show. So kudos to Black Sails. I love the show anyway, but for a first episode in the first season, I think they did fantastically with this. And funnily enough, I didn't think the first episode was that great on the whole, but this fight really made it, and it was a good way to finish off that first episode. And maybe think about some of the things I've said and make your own judgments. And if you disagree with things I've said, of course, post below and I might reply and give my views and we can have a discussion. But just to remind you once again, I've done plenty of movie and TV fight reviews in the past, so if you've enjoyed this, by all means have a look at the playlists on my channel and go and have a look at some of the others. Cheers folks. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, follow us on Facebook, you can buy t-shirts through Spreadshirt, support us on Patreon or follow us on Pinterest. Thank you.